Now that we're done with priming, we can move on to base coating the miniature. For base coating, I'll use a Thamar Black, an Iron Hull Gray, Midland Flesh, Umbral Umber, Sanguine Base, and Murderous Magenta. Fits well with the name of the model. Alright. So to begin with my base coats, I usually like to work from a darker base coat up to a lighter highlight. I find that this is the easiest way for me to paint. So I've laid out my colors, each one, hair, skin tone, clothing, and I will mix on my wet palette. So we'll start with the flesh tone. And put some paint down. I've got just a little bit of water from my wet palette underneath with the sponge, so it's nice and moist. My paint won't dry out too quickly. I am mixing the Umbral Umber and my main flesh color, the Midland Flesh. So I'm going to mix in to the flesh tone, and I'll get slightly darker color. And I'll start by applying this color all over the model. I'm not worried about going outside the lines. We can fix that later. I start with my flesh tones first because everything else is on top of the model in a way. So when I go back to paint other things, I'll already have my flesh tones done. It's easiest because it's layers. I'll have to do several coats of the color, but that's okay. So I'll let this layer dry, and then I'll go back and I'll make another layer of paint with the same color to get a nice base color. Now that the first coat of the base color for the skin is dry, we'll move on to the second coat. I wanted to let you guys know that using a hairdryer after each step really cuts the time down. Now that we're done with the second coat, let's let this dry and we'll move on to the next part of the model. Now that we've finished the skin base coat, we're going to move on to the hair. I am using the Thamar Black, mixed with the Iron Hull Gray. And again, just like with the skin, I'm going to mix my mid-tone with my darkest color to make a nice in-between shade for our base. So I'll start with the hair by the face. And I'll try to be a little bit more careful since we're putting on a base coat and we already have another base coat. I might even go back with my little brush and fill that in. And I make sure I get all the areas, even underneath. And even if you do get a little bit of the hair color on the skin, it's alright. We'll go back later and we'll do some lining, which helps highlight the miniature and bring the miniature together. I'll let this first coat dry, and then I'll come back and I'll do a second coat. Alright, now that the first coat for the hair is dry, we'll move on to the second. I'm just using the same color. We'll let the second coat dry, and we will move on to the clothing. Now that we've finished with the hair, we'll move on to the clothing. I'll be using Sanguine Base and Murderous Magenta. Just like before, I mix one color into the other to get an in-between. Now I use a little bit more caution to apply my colors. I don't go all the way to the edges. I'll come back with my smaller brush. And switch to my smaller brush. It's a lot easier this way to get a nice edge. Now that I've got one coat, I'll go back and put a second coat on after this dries. Now that we've got the second coat of the clothes done, we can move on to all the other areas we haven't painted yet. For the metal parts, such as the sword and her headpiece, I will just paint black for her headband. And paint the sword blade black. Anything that has a metal paint applied to it or non-metallic metal technique will have either a black undercoat for silver or a dark brown undercoat for gold. This makes it so you don't have to either apply as much metallic paint, or it just gives you a good base to start with your non-metallic metals. So I'll move on to the Umbrel Umber for my brown base coats for any part of the model that's going to have gold metal. I'll also be using this brown color for the straps at her wrists and the straps on the scabbard of the sword. I'll also use the brown for her shoes as a good base coat. I'll finish it off with just a little bit of the same color I used for the cloth, the magenta and the sanguine base mixed together, to come in and hit her arm straps here with just a little bit of color. And the hilt of her sword. First base coat is done on all our other areas that we had to do for the black, the brown, and the little armbands. I will go back and do a second layer of the base coating, and after that we'll get started on highlights and shadows.